Hey, welcome back to the Indie Coach podcast. I'm with my buddy Matthew Morris, whom we actually met through mutual friends. To give another shout out, Mara McCann and her decision maker meetings. If you're interested in that, I'm sure you can go to decisionmakermeetings.com and Mara would be happy to talk to you. She's a great connector, and that's how Matthew and I got synced up, which was awesome. And then we had a couple
Indeed.
conversations, and I just love what Matthew brings to the table. He has a ton of wealth and knowledge. So I asked him to be on the podcast, and he graciously accepted. And one of the things we were just talking about is I really feel like one of his solid strengths and superpowers, maybe, are around the film financing kind of things. But to kind of tee this up, Matthew, can you give maybe a
Sure.
little bit of background of what you've done to kind of get into the industry and kind of set the stage of what you do in the entertainment space?
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. And thanks for that. And I couldn't agree more. Mara is a uh, what we call a super connector in that, if you look at your eventual sort of family tree of colleagues and friends and confidants and whatnot, you can kind of trace them back to her in
Yeah.
many cases. I've got a couple of people like that in my life that, we sort of laugh, lovingly about saying, oh, well, the gentleman's name is Mark Kramer, and he's a great writer and a produced writer. And, I was talking to a colleague of mine who I'm producing something with just last week, and she was like, and guess what? It comes from the Mark Kramer tree. So I'm like, oh, naturally, so I sort of lovingly said, we need to, if there's ever a campus, we'll erect a nice statue to Mark and those who connected everyone.
Exactly.
Um, but that's kind of the key to this business, right? Is relationships
Yep.
and who you know and what kind of rapport you build, and most importantly, the trust you build with those around you, which
Very
is,
true.
there's no greater currency, quote unquote, than that real trust and everyone
That's
rowing in the
that.
same direction.
Yeah.
And part of that, I think, and a big part of that is understanding you are, yes, this is a very, very creative business and creative passions run high and hot, but it's a business at the end of the day. And 99 times out of 100, you've got to prepare to sit in front of someone and justify why you're asking them for a lot of money, you know, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars, tens of millions, hundreds of millions. I've been in every one of those conversations.
Hmm.
And there are some pretty common tropes, and one is common correct. Um, what I mean by that is being able to speak in specifics. Um, don't say my budget is around 3.5 million. Tell me what the exact number is.
Hmm.
And we're going to look at the budget and we're going to understand how that all is going to work or not in today's market, especially. But to not to stray too far away from the opening question, my background, I've been in this business for, I think, not since 98 or 99, sort of officially. When I started, as you and I discussed, I started booking comedians for my college. And as an employee of the university, and just fell in love with it. Just fell in love with the circus and comedy and sort of all of that. And even considered at one point joining an agency after I left college, to book, to sort of be on that side of the business, and just and decided against it. As fate would have it, I got offered a job with a music venue, and and went off on that path, that tangent, for about 4 or 5 years, managing talent, managing bands, doing the A&R thing, working for Paramount, a couple of their live venues, and working with the production manager at those various venues, attaching to the road manager. It was basically fulfillment of writers, the famous writers. I want only green M&Ms in my dressing room, or I want, specific kind of laundry detergent, that kind of stuff. A lot of it was that, it was shuffling talent to and from hotels and airports, and when they weren't getting along, making emergency arrangements thereof, which happened more often than you think, that they wouldn't ride together because they were in some sort of spat, So I got a lot of sort of how the sausage is made behind the scenes on that part of the business. But as the 90s were sort of unfolding, and you saw Napster and you sort of saw the business, I didn't love it. I didn't love it enough to fight for it for myself, if that makes any sense.
Hmm.
right? So
Yeah.
my first love was movie and television, and or features in television, I should say. And I wanted to make that transition, and I thought, stupidly enough, that all of the background that I had would translate, and it didn't, not even a little bit.
Mm.
It was like starting over with zero at
Wow. Yeah.
ground zero. Um, but I figured out where a small production was going on, and I happened to know somebody who knew somebody involved with it from just sort of asking around, and I hunted them down and volunteered to work for free, and did that gig. I got the best advice I ever got: show up early, leave late, stay on task, and don't screw this up for me. Right? By the person who is hiring me. It's like the mafia. You're only as good as, hey, he's a friend of ours, and that means a lot.
Yeah.
So I set off and did production for probably 15 years with the goal of producing, because I wanted to learn how it got made on the ground, because that's sort of where you start. Well, how does the house get built, right? You don't just walk in the door of a fully furnished, beautiful home. Somebody had to lay bricks and plumbing and, electrical wiring and whatnot. And I wanted to learn how to do all that, you know. Um, I make a joke sometimes with the classes I teach that my some of my friends and colleagues and relatives, sort of civilians, quote unquote, think a 2 hour movie takes 2 hours to make. And it is, as very complicated. So that
Yeah.
was my goal, really, was to sort of understand how it all comes together, and understanding, I would ask, well, what would that camera and that dolly, that rig, what would that normally cost? Just sort of understand what where the resources are being allocated, just to educate myself. I would talk to the production companies and the various departments, and I had the privilege of working with some great people, and I bounced around to sort of different positions. I did pretty much everything but catering and camera, and you don't really want me to do either of those things, honestly. That's not my gift. But it was an education. It was sort of a forced walk, if you want, on my own part, because I wanted to do this. I wanted to originate content, work with the creative side of it, and of course, then you realize, well, who pays for the party, and how does that happen? And it's like, I've used this example too. It's almost like saying I want to be a painter, and then understanding how I need to raise $1 million for the canvas and the paints, and then I need to figure out how to sell it and market it, or market it then sell it. And I need to be able to set myself up so I can do it again and again and again. And every time I start a new painting, it starts all over again from scratch, right? It's
Right.
sort of the "what have you done for me lately" kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I learned pretty early on, because I got my ass handed to me a couple of times, because I was unprepared in conversations with some money folk and distributors, and there were parts of the business I had complete blind spots on, but those were exciting to me. And then I whenever I've discovered a pothole in my own career, I leaned into it. I'm like, let me learn everything I can about what I don't know, because I don't want that feeling in a meeting of not knowing what I'm talking about. I think half this battle is walking into a room confident, not cocky or arrogant, but confident in what you are selling: the project, the people, the circumstances, the who, where, why, what, and how, and be able to answer every question that someone poses at you truthfully, confidently, right? So they know I know what I'm doing. So if they're even considering trusting me with a lot of money and time and resources and connections and relationships and reputations, that they're going to be in good hands. And that's my job.
Yeah.
One in one A, make a great film, and also make sure that those who put their hard-earned money on the line feel good about it. Now, it doesn't mean that the movie's going to make money, but I will do my level best to make sure it doesn't lose money. And I think that's the key to understanding that there's always risk. Risk is unavoidable. And anyone who walks into a meeting and says this is guaranteed is either lying or stupid or both, because it's not. And I just want to be prepared. It's like the guys on Smartless say they call it sexy indifference, right? Where you're just intriguing enough, and you're like, I can take it or leave it, whatever you have to say. It's not quite that, but it is walking into a room, knowing how to pitch and knowing how to make an argument, you know, and being
Yeah.
effective at it. Telling a good story is really what's important, and I did learn that from some great mentors of telling a good story.
Yeah.
And that narrative is about you. It's about the project you're trying to get done, the project itself. Um, it's telling a good story. It's intriguing where they ask questions. I know if they start saying, well, what about this and what about that specifically? I know I've done my job. I've got them interested where they're kicking the tires. Yeah.
Yeah, I read a lot about investments, investors. I pitched a lot myself, unfortunately, to a lot of investors that have not done film, which can be good and bad, but it's eye-opening in
Yeah,
what they find interesting and not interesting.
for
And
sure.
I just read a book recently where at the end of the day, they statistically know that, well, I guess so much as one can in looking at these things, that people still invest based upon feeling. And then they kind of
It is.
justify the numbers. Like, it's not to say that they don't look at a pro forma projection. They make sure all that stuff's lined up, but only after it's triggered in their brain that this has me, this has my attention, I'm
Yeah,
interested in this. They can be talked out of it based upon the numbers and things that you're supposed to provide, or the lack thereof, if you don't do that due diligence. But people tend to forget. It's almost like they're going to argue their way into in their investment, when really your job is to tell the story of this journey, and they
yeah,
get excited about that,
right,
and then they will invest. Then they will justify their investment based upon the numbers, really de-risking. And
right,
to me,
right.
de-risking is such a big, hairy thing. And when you and I have talked in the past, I just love your strategy around de-risking. Can you maybe talk a little bit about risk and de-risking in the film
Mm.
space?
Yeah, I mean, really, it depends on kind of your pathway that you want to discover. And I always recommend having a lot of shots on goal, right? And that once you've established what your real budget is from a qualified line producer or someone qualified to do that budget in a realistic manner, and we can get into the details of that. But once you've established that and you've established what you're pitching, soup to nuts, right? You're sitting in front of me, or you're sitting in front of, a producer who's going to talk about how to get it done, or you're talking to someone who can pay for it to get done. um, they want to know, well, where are the landmines in this? What does this really mean? What could I lose at the end of the day? I have found, look, people, this is going to sound really fundamentally like no kidding. Um, but when you're meeting with someone for the purposes of pitching them something to invest in, they're not there to hoping to hate it. They're there hoping that you're going to give them some sort of eureka moment to go, oh, I never understood that about it. The film business entertainment is risky. It is very risky. In certain economies, it's probably less risky than one would think compared to traditional blue chip investments, right? And I'm not a financial expert. I'm not here to give financial advice. Neither are you. Nobody's here to say, if you buy this stock today, you're going to be rich tomorrow. If you'd have bought Apple stock and blah, blah, blah. It's not that. We're here to say, here's the project. Here's how they typically get financed in one of several ways. This is what I need you for in this particular transaction. And I think it's really important to understand that and what you're building around them to make that ask. Your budget is, I use the round number, $5 million because it's easy math. If I'm sitting with you and I'm asking you about, or I'm trying to convince you to back me on a $5 million film, the first thing they need to know is I'm not asking you for $5 million, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anyone who sits in front of you and says, "Hey, I'll write you a check right now for $5 million." Great, that's fantastic. I'll dance, the rest of the night. But I don't know that I will take it, or I wouldn't take it until it's fully understood how that gets deployed, because I don't necessarily need all your money. What I really need in the beginning is your financial muscle. I need your endorsement or your backing to say, I will back you. And here's the document and the agreements that show that. It's what I've used, the term I've used recently is a hunting license. That
Yeah.
gives me a hunting license to go create the best possible transaction I can create. I'm going to look at tax incentives as a risk mitigator. I'm going to look at pre-buys or pre-sales if that's possible, negative pickups if that's possible. I'm going to look at every way to sort of cut down that exposure as much as I can. I've got a picture right now that we're producing, has talent, has distribution, has a uh, international backstop in terms of financial, basically a pre-sale at the end of the day. It has a great sort of soundtrack musical element with licensing from a highly well-known, respected musician to cover their songs from a major label. Has all the bells and whistles. It has everything except what? The equity to make the movie. They have tax incentives, they have all of that. So if you're looking at that from the outside in, and the budget in that is around, I think, $6 million, give or take. Um, and I know I said speaking specifics, but I'm not going to here publicly, but it's around $6 million. So looking at those sort of different pieces and those different markers, I don't need $6 million. Now, I could find an investor who would say, okay, I'll finance all of that, knowing that those other pieces are collateral instruments that demystify and de-risk my $6 million, which is really the basis of the transaction. In the initial stages, what I need from him, her, or them, or that institution is to say, yes, we're in under these circumstances. Then I can go begin closing these different sort of pieces. They already know they have a big chunk of that risk gone because my tax incentives, because my international backstop, and I haven't even sold or talked about domestic yet. But I can then also look at the possibility. Well, could I get some sort of pre-buy from a streamer? Could I take it to a market? Could I just go ahead and make it and turn it into a jump ball? At that point, it gives me the luxury of choice to protect their money at the end of the day. So, what has not happened at that point? I haven't spent a dime of their money, not a dime, right? I'm not risking anything until we know the transaction, until we can see around those corners and kind of know where the landmines are going to be. And then we can sort of begin to plot and plan for those. And remember, in that particular situation, we still had domestic to sell, right? And make the fiscal determination: is this better off as a streaming sale out of the gate, or is this a market play, theatrical play? Where's the upside? Where's all the risk at the end of the day? And keep this in mind when you're pitching someone, and a lot of filmmakers are still kind of hung up on the theatrical release.
Right. Yeah.
And we know that landscape is completely different, and it's not impenetrable at all. It happens, but keep in mind you're adding print and advertising costs on top of your budget. So it becomes a bigger nut to overcome. So that $6 million, let's say we decide to go theatrical and we have a full, you know, multi-screen, I'm talking 1,000 screens or more, nationwide release or international release. I've then probably doubled my budget or doubled my negative costs at that point. So now my backer has a lot more risk, right? Unless what? Unless they finance the P&A. And now they become sort of basically the primary senior lender, if you will, for lack of a better term. But it's also doubled their risk, right? So now I can only offset what I offset with the production, not the distribution of it. So these are conversations we're going to have. You may be making gold where that's worth the juice is worth the squeeze. Um, it just depends. And then we'll look at marketing. We'll look at all these sort of things to hopefully make that a smart decision. But my overall point with all of this is that when I'm sitting with someone, I'm capable of having every one of those conversations in an educated, thorough manner so they know what they're getting into. And they know I know what I'm doing at the end of the day. I've raised a bunch of money. I've raised money for development. I've raised money for production. I've raised money for corporate things. Um, it's a lot. Development money is hard to raise. And I've been pretty successful with that in recent years. And maybe that indicates a more openness and willingness to take chances or take risk, or maybe they're looking at volatile stock markets and say, well, what do I have to lose? Movies look fun. I like movies, let's try that and see, you know. Um, there are multiple types of people who invest in movies, and we can get into that later if you like. But really, at the end of the day, it's chopping down the tree one swing at a time and understanding how all the money gets stitched together, right? I don't, like I said, I don't want somebody just to hand me $5 million and go, hey, go make the movie. That's the biggest risk you could possibly take. And it's completely unnecessary. I've had some great mentors in my day. And I remember asking that question early in my career, thinking, well, that'd be just like winning the Powerball. And I had one mentor I was speaking with, Doug Falconer, who passed away, unfortunately, a few years ago. Just love that guy. He taught me so much about this business and how to deal make, really, at the end of the day, and deregulate that risk, or not deregulate it, but demystify it, really,
Yeah.
and understand what moves to make before, during, and after you're engaging, money. And he had 35 years, on me in deal making. And he used to say that all the time. He's like, don't take stupid money. Don't take stupid money. That's dumb money. Don't take it. It's a headache and a half. Take the deal and then structure it, work back on it to say, this is how we're going to fit the hunting license you're giving me, gives me the opportunity to go make the best deal I can. If
Yeah.
that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, man, this is all gold,
Yeah.
man. I
Yeah.
love what you're saying. Let's kind of, so I have some other questions, but I kind of, I'm liking the conversation. Let's continue
Mhm.
down that road if that's okay.
Sure.
So to
Sure.
keep with this scenario, let's say we have a action film and it has a couple of, maybe not A plus listers, but people
Mhm.
that can do some pre-sales. It's at $5 million. What what's the minimum amount that you would say, okay, the project is going to move forward? And what would be kind of the first thing that you would do with the first money in?
Well, I want to sort of understand what first money in means. And first thing I would do if I'm sort of brought into a conversation like that, where some of this is already in motion, is I'd want to really understand. It's like a paramedic showing up on the scene of something. You're like, well, you just want to begin sort of triaging what needs to be done first, and sort of what condition the patient's in. And I'm not equating a movie with somebody dying on the street. I'm saying, there's a process in my brain. It's that sort
Yeah.
of, John Nash, Beautiful Mind question, all of the, if you could animate it, there would be like equations floating around my head in terms of, well, what's the right move, to make. First, I'd want to know if the budget is correct, uh, that it can stand, what you're trying to do. The question I get from my reps a lot is, what's the money in the cast budget to support the budget, right? Can you afford a cast for the budget at the end of the day, right? And it is as such these days, where the assumption is likely the project is going to go to streaming, or it's going to have a very short theatrical life. So there is a little less pressure on needing a top 15 actor, top 20 actor to be on the poster. You need sort of very recognizable faces. That could be from television, it could be, and now there's such a blending between series and feature.
Yeah, for sure.
It's quite astonishing, really, how
Yeah.
I've seen, stars of TV shows now get movies greenlit, whereas before that never happened.
Never
And
happened. When we were growing
years
up,
ago, no, not
never
once. There
came
was
across.
there was no crossover,
Yeah.
right? You had the occasional actor like a George Clooney, who
Mhm.
decided, and Bruce Willis, who decided to sort of graduate from their hit TV shows to become movie stars. But it was lightning in a bottle in some cases, right? It just
Definitely.
never happened. And certainly you
Yep.
wouldn't go backwards. If you were a
No,
movie star, you wouldn't go back into do series,
extremely
which we
rare.
see
Yeah.
all the time. We see, the Reese
Hmm.
Witherspoons and Nicole Kidmans oscillating between the two mediums quite
Yeah.
often, right? Um, And that's a testament to sort of how series are made today, which are very cinematic, right? They're almost like 10-hour
Very true.
movies, if you
Yeah,
will.
definitely.
And it's a shorter production schedule than a normal television uh, schedule would be in years past when they're pumping out 22 to 24
Yeah.
episodes in a season. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to stray. But you want to sort of look at it from 10,000 feet and say, well, what are my different elements? What are the pillars? Where's the cast land? Where does the budget land? What does the schedule look like? We know the genre is action, which is a pretty sought after genre, has a lot of legs, meaning they sell well. Action films sell, along with horror, sell probably pretty much better than anything worldwide, right? Action just translates. Um, if you're on a very limited budget, you have to sort of begin to ask, well, how can I maximize my action sequences, those set pieces on limited budgets, right? That comes down to sort of the lighting and the prep of it all. Um, but I would want to know the definition of first money in and what that means. I would look at tax incentives. I would look at what my pre-sales or pre-buys might look like. I just want to know the financial landscape. If I have talent attached and I kind of know their value in the marketplace, that allows me to have distribution questions, or distribution conversations, which I want to have before I even sit with my investor. Because
Good.
why?
Yeah.
Because I am demonstrating an exit strategy, revenue model for the film. My mentor said this to me a long time ago. I think I said this in class once. If you're sitting in front of a backer or an investor or someone who's considering investing in your film in some shape or form, and you don't come with a very detailed explanation as to how your film is going to get to the marketplace, and I'm not talking about we're just going to get into festivals. I'm talking about a real answer. What they hear in their mind is, I want $5 million to go to the 7-Eleven and buy $5 million worth of lottery tickets because I just know we're going to win, man. I just know it in my bones. That's what they hear,
Yeah.
right? Part of demystifying the risk or mitigating that risk is the exit strategy of saying your money's only going to be out there for about 18 months because of X, Y, Z. That's what they want to know too, is when is it coming back? How much is coming back? When can I start seeing revenue? When can I start seeing this or that? And that's when you can begin sort of structuring your deal so it speaks to that, right? Maybe it's including an executive producer fee in the budget for them so they get paid something out of the gate when the film gets set up. So they feel like there's money coming back to them, right? As long as it doesn't impact the budget too much. There's ways around it to sort of deal make like that, the little nuances, the seasoning, if you will, to get people to say yes, to go forward. So when you're talking about first money in, I also want to know how it's structured, because here's a key point that a lot of folks miss a lot, is that if I'm coming to you for that money and you say, Matt, I'm good for 3 million of it. In this case, that's what, about half the budget in this scenario, give or
Hmm.
take.
Hmm.
You have to know that I have to borrow the other three from some other way. I gotta monetize my tax incentives. I gotta find a lender, maybe some sort of gap financier who's willing to take a chance at a high interest rate. They are no longer in first position of repayment or recoupment. They're first position after all of the debt negative costs are covered. And I've had deals go south because, equity people are immovable on that. And I respect that. They're putting the fuel in the car. I
Yeah.
respect that. But even if you bought a house and decided to buy a second house and you were going to sell the first house, the bank gets paid back first before you get the profit to buy the next house, right?
Absolutely.
So it works that way here too, at the end of the day. If you have a senior lender, meaning someone who's loaning you money for some element of it, they come out first, no matter what. So your equity person kind of has to understand that. That's one of the reasons what I touched on a few minutes ago about, well, does the investor in this particular case want to finance all of it? Then they are in first position, right? And they are capturing the tax incentives and all the pre-sales if they exist, or some sort of revenue that comes in or can be captured before the film is even done. They're capturing all that to then sort of control the transaction from top to bottom. And they can take tax benefits too, I'm sure, from doing that if they're capable. that's a great scenario for them because then they control dollar one,
Yeah.
provided there's no theatrical. Once there's theatrical, then that changes that equation to where they're sitting behind P&A. But they're the first act in that particular situation.
And
That's that might be my starting point, right? And then sort of working backwards. But this is after conversations I'm having with them, so I kind of know I've read the room and I kind of know what to serve them, right?
yeah, let's say on this $5 million action film that we have for pre-sales, what does that look like to you in 2025? I know pre-sales have been a challenge to say the least.
Yeah.
What do pre-sales look like for you? Are you really holding out for that, or it's a nice to have, or it's a must have in this equation? How does that look?
Pre-sales are pretty thin. They're pretty thin. And they have been trending thinner and thinner and thinner each year. It
Mm,
used to be back in the day, you could almost fund your entire film
yeah,
off some sort of
definitely.
pre-buy, international. You take that money off the table, but it leaves domestic and usually North America in general.
Yeah,
Um, and there are many a film that got set up that way.
yeah,
And some still do, depending on the budget. I think in this particular case, an action film probably has a better chance of capturing some of those than, say, a drama or a comedy, which are tougher to sell, or some sort of social thing. Um, Mostly your genre movies are going to do better that way with,
yeah,
in horror in some cases, um, sports, if you're talking about soccer or hockey or something that's more international, sometimes baseball, sometimes basketball. If we're talking about thrillers, like a whodunit, um, that's probably on the list too, but a little bit further down. The conversations I've had with most sales reps, distributors, and producers reps, it's really who's on the poster, who's in the movie, and how much screen time do they have. That's going to sell really almost as much as anything, if not more. So if you have a recognizable face, um, on your one sheet, to an international distributor, you're probably in a better position to get something out of it. So I'd probably classify it as a nice to have. Um, and it's something that I would begin investigating to see how that affects the overall deal structure. But I
yeah,
don't know that I'll count on it. This one I mentioned earlier has an international scenario kind of already baked in. And I'm pretty convinced that was done based on the relationship that they wanted short term and long term. So, we'll see how that movie does overseas.
yeah,
I'm a little skeptical of that, but, you know, time will
yeah,
tell.
yeah.
So,
So pre-sales right now. So for those that are listening or watching and don't fully know how international sells, so there's domestic, which is US, a lot of times Canada is included, and then there's the rest of the world, and they're not broken down by country. I think there's 192 countries or whatever in the world.
yeah,
It's broken down by territory, and that's usually based upon
right,
language. So when you sell, let's say France, you're usually selling France and French speaking territories.
correct,
That's how it's kind of
correct. Yeah,
purchased
yeah,
or bought. So how
yep.
many, when you're pre-selling, how much are you trying to, I mean, you're trying to maximize and leave on the table as much as you can because you want to make the movie first, create this epic product, and then sell the product. When they're pre-selling, they're buying it on a discount because you haven't even made the movie yet. But like Matthew was
Correct.
saying, that you're getting the money up front though, so that you can go make the movie. And back in the day, people used to do
Yeah,
entire budgets on pre-sales, which is
right.
crazy. How many territories though are you trying to sell? Like how do, or let me ask it this way. $5 million is 100% of our budget. What's ideally your pre-sales? How much are you hoping to get in pre-sales?
Well, back in the day, we hope for that to be around 25%. That would be pretty safe in some cases. On a $5 million independent film, though, there is a perceived difference in the quality of movie that these distributors believe they're going to get based on your budget level. Right
Hmm.
now, that's changing a little bit because there's such an influx of independent films, and technology and whatnot has made it far more democratized than it used to be. So you can make a better looking film
Yeah.
for a lot less for
Right.
less of
Right.
a studio budget, and the studio budgets have become kind of prohibitive in a way, because they have been bloated, and we've seen this shift. You and I have talked about this. We've seen this shift in recent years towards the independent filmmaker because we know how to get shit done
Right.
for a good price with good writing, and we creatively solve problems. We don't financially solve the problem,
Yep.
which I think is interesting way to do it. And you can't buy your way out of a problem. In other words, there's no rescue mission coming for you. You get what you
Yeah.
get.
Yeah.
As a as an old grip used to tell me all the time, you get what you get, man. So um, you know, it used to be that. It used to be a bigger chunk. Now I think you're lucky to get 10%
Yeah.
of your budget.
Yeah, I would
Lucky.
agree with
And
that.
it depends on the territory. And you're right, folks who are listening. It is not country by country. It is English speaking or French speaking, or you might get some Asian markets that are broken up by you know boundaries
Yeah.
or
Language
line,
or yeah.
some sort of border.
Yeah.
Um, but generally, you're looking at like the Australian market and maybe the overseas Far East market, which could include Korea and Singapore and Japan. And some of those sort of get grouped, together. North America is the United States and Canada, although Canada is also its own territory. So it depends on how that does. South America can be broken down into Central America,
Yeah.
Brazil, your BRIC nations like Brazil, Russia, China, India, et cetera, can be looked at as one territory,
Yeah.
although India is usually its own. Um,
Yeah.
and depending on geopolitics, you don't really know where those territories are going to land either,
Very
right?
true.
So I
Yep.
don't know how well we're doing selling films into Russia at the moment. It's probably not
Exactly.
very good,
Yeah.
or even
Yeah.
China for that matter
Even China.
is very ebb and flow and
Right.
very tough to predict,
Yeah,
you
and
know.
their government, as we all know, very much gets involved there because they want to ensure
Mm,
whatever it's going to go through the country, and they have a finite number that they usually agree to
right,
they're going to take on, and if there's any sway that they find not appealing to their public, they're going to say no because they're going to hold out for the
right,
studio films that are a little bit more
right.
neutral. When you talk
Ab-
about I,
yeah, absolutely. And
when
and
you
I'll and I'll
yeah,
add
go
I'll
ahead.
add too is that they, especially in areas like China, which has a very robust film market, especially
Huge. Yeah,
domestically. Their films
huge.
do really well, and
Yeah,
there's some films over there that just it's a bell that just keeps ringing. They like the high end, flashy stuff. They're not going to take your very intimate drama likely, but
no,
they want things that are going to be in line with their political philosophies that are not too quote unquote controversial, undermining in any way, and they do it for cultural reasons as well. And that happens in throughout some European territories too. They have a certain number of non-French speaking or non-German speaking products that they'll allow into the country when it comes to film and television. For the most part, it's pretty loose. As networks are more international and streaming, is global, those lines have begun to blur a
yeah,
lot. But
yeah.
if you're talking about tax incentives and cultural grants and specific things like that, you're going towards in terms of financing, then that can get a little bit more sort of territorial, if you will, for lack of a better term, a
Yeah.
little more strict to
Yeah,
get.
exactly.
Yeah.
When we talk about getting talent attached,
Mm.
what does that mean exactly? When is someone officially attached?
That's a great question, and I hear that all the time. Of so and so's attached, and you say, okay, where's the contract? And there
Yeah,
isn't one, then they're not
right,
attached,
right. There you
right?
go. Right.
I mean, you can have uh, a letter of intent that says if funding comes through, if schedules align, if negotiations are successful, if you have the right director, then my client would be interested. Um, I've operated a few times off of the if come scenario where what I'm trying to convey to my reps is yes, I have confirmed interest from this particular actor, which generally means they're aware of the project and there is some interest in them playing the role or some sort of part in the
Like
production, and
that.
that
Yep.
is valuable information.
It is. Yeah.
I have that on a few projects that has and is moving the needle because it acknowledges that they like it. It acknowledges they're willing to come on board pending these sort of things. Um, you know, that could be an email. It could be something. It's got to be something in writing. It could be an email. It could be a text. It can't be just a phone call and a trust me, bro kind of thing.
Yeah.
No, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Um, if the agencies or their reps get word of it, you know, you're going to piss them off
It's
good
not
and
good.
plenty,
No.
and you'll never get them on one of your projects, or you're going to wind up overpaying. So, you have to be very, very, very careful about how it's represented in your decks, in your presentation materials. Please make
Yep.
sure it says this is our wish list
That's right.
of actors. This is who we like for the role. This is our dream choice. Once you use the word attached, you better be able to produce a contract,
Yeah.
a
Absolutely.
signed contract,
Signed contract.
a
I
signed
like the way you
contract.
worded that before about because I have had situations where I've talked to the actual actor and they were like,
Hmm.
send me the script. I do. They're like, this is interesting. I'd be interested. But until their manager says
Oh,
they're
sure.
in,
Yeah.
then they're not in.
And
Now,
they're not.
and
Yeah.
now,
I've got friends who are celebrities. They're very well known names, and they're friends. I talk to them routinely,
yeah,
and we will talk about a project. And the minute we get into that, they're like, "Hey, send that over to my guy at CAA or my
absolutely.
guy at Gersh
That's
or
right.
whatever." We'll go from there. There is an absolute, it's like
Yeah.
the thing in the limousine that comes up between the driver and the
Exactly.
passenger,
Exactly.
and I respect that because they're my friend,
That's right.
of course. And
No,
it's a
definitely.
business. I get it. I mean,
Yeah.
I will come through the front door properly, of course,
Yep.
but it also means that when I do
Yeah.
send it through proper channels, I can go back to them and say, "Hey, we sent it now." So then there's an acknowledgement with
That's
them. I
right.
mean, I can't tell you how many times we've actually made hard offers
Yeah.
and gotten no response. I mean, I'm talking not even a, FO,
Wow.
nothing,
That's crazy.
nothing. And I'm talking, I remember what we made a $1 million offer to a very well-known actor who was having a comeback, right? And it was a generous offer, and we got nothing,
Oh, that's crazy.
nothing.
Wow.
So we increased the offer. We increased the offer by $50,000. Nothing, 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 nothing. It wasn't until we got until about 1.2 or 1.3, the rep finally came back and said, "No, thank you."
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Two words, "No, thank you."
Yeah. There you go.
But at least we got a response, right?
Yeah. I know Hollywood is they never, they almost never, but this is a Ronism. They never say no, but they never say yes. At some point, you just got to move on. I
Oh,
remember,
it's the slow no. It's the
yes, it's
slow
slow no. I
no,
like that. Yeah.
which comes. It's like water torture, man. I'd rather
Yeah.
have a bullet to the head than
Exactly. Just tell me,
water
man.
torture.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just say f you, man. I'd rather hear
Yeah.
that
Right.
than
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Give me
and
something.
yeah, and generally you have to sort of bake that in to say, all right, well, we'll give it. If it's somebody really specific, you'll give it 2 weeks. And if there's nothing in 2 weeks, you move on, right? But
That's what I do. Yeah.
you just have to be, and this is the thing too that I say too a lot, Ron, and it's hard to convey and sometimes hard to practice, but you do have to at some point set the emotions aside and look at it practically as a business person. They said no, let's move on.
Yeah.
You know, um, the script isn't working here. We need to look at a rewrite. And part of being a producer is telling that truth
Yeah.
and saying to people who are very close to what they've created, it's not landing, and
Yeah.
we need to address it.
Yeah.
You know, if you're getting a lot of no's and a lot of passes, this is one of the reasons I like talking to casting directors early in my process. And they can, if they will be generous enough to read the script or some sort of, summary of it to give me an idea is kind of where ideally I'd like them to read the script and they can tell me if my movie is castable or not, you know.
That's great.
Does it have problems? I've
Howard.
had both responses. Hey, this is great. When are we going out? And I've also had a casting director come back and go, I hate everybody in this script. I hate every character. There's no one to root for. The guy's a jerk. The woman is, who would want to
Yeah.
marry her? I mean, just
Yeah.
took it down to its knees. And, she wasn't wrong after sort of thinking it through.
Yeah.
Took it back to the writer. It stung, of course.
Of
But the
course.
writer came back. The writer stepped up and came back with a much better draft.
Interesting. That's
Much
fantastic.
better. I let her read it again and she was like, okay. Okay,
I see it.
now we're
Yeah.
cooking with some grease here, you know.
Yeah.
So it is a valuable tool if your casting folks are willing to do it for
That's
you.
that's
Yeah.
outstanding. Um, I want to come back to the casting, but I had a question about,
Hmm.
so we have 5 million
Hmm.
um tax incentives, tax
Mm.
benefits.
Yeah.
Can you talk me through a little bit about on the $5 million, or, you're shooting, let's say in the well, it could be anywhere you want, the benefits and maybe the difference between a tax rebate and a um, tax what did I just go blank, a grant, if you will.
Yeah, there's grants, there's refunds, there's rebates, there's
Yeah,
sort of
refund.
different
Thank you. Yeah,
different forms.
yeah, exactly. So that's kind of the three. And then how do
Yeah.
you how are you thinking of a tax benefit? Because I find in the indie space, some people are not even thinking about it until after the film's done. They spent the money, they go through the process of getting the money back, and then they go, okay, we're going to deploy this in our marketing, which could be fine if that's your strategy. But just talk to me a little bit about tax benefits.
So yeah, tax incentives, like tax incentives are a wonderful thing. And it's, one could argue it's kept the film industry alive, for many, many years.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
they're a wonderful tool. And, every state, or not every state, but every state that has them, um, it's generally an economic move to create jobs and keep a brain drain from happening. I mean, you can look at Georgia as a prime example,
Yeah,
of that. Savannah College of Arts and Designs is a wonderful institution that for years was pumping out designers and, costumers and wardrobe people and CGI, all of it. And they were going to New York or California, and they were not staying in the state. Now that Georgia has this very robust tax incentive program, they stay home. And that keeps us often a six-figure salary in the state, paying taxes, buying homes, eating in restaurants, buying a car, going to school, et cetera. So for an economy, and I've lobbied my own state for this,
same.
it's great for the economy because
Great.
it's a clean job. It's not, excuse quote unquote, it's environmentally friendly because it doesn't create pollution. It might irritate, traffic sometimes or neighborhoods sometimes. I get that. I'm not unsympathetic, but it's a clean industry. It's a high paying industry, generally speaking. Um, it is temporary work, but if you have enough projects coming through, in my
Yeah.
early days, I never wanted for work. I bounced from project to project, because there was enough going on that I could work 10 to 11 months out of the year, and make a pretty decent salary, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, so the economic benefits, which I'm sure we could do an entire show on that,
Yeah.
are tremendous. But when you are setting up a project in a state, and of course, keep a couple of things in mind. It is not a one-to-one discount, right? If Georgia says, hey, you can max out at 30%, that does not mean that's 30% of your budget. It's a percentage of a percentage of a percentage of your budget. It's what they call, quote, a qualified spend. So they will crawl over your budget and determine what money is actually being spent in the state of Georgia: goods, services, labor, everything from your writer and director down to your PAs. And they'll give you an estimate. When I'm factoring that in a finance plan, I generally factor 80% of my budget is going to qualify for tax incentives, and that's the number I arrive at, right? Secondly, it's understanding, is it a rebate, a refund, or a grant, or some variation. A grant is easy. A grant, they you qualify, they give you the dough. You can either monetize it up front or take it on the back, but it's, of course, it's non-refundable, or non-recourse, I should say. It's yours to keep and use as long as you use it for what you're saying you're using it for. Tax incentives in terms of rebates and refunds work in a very similar manner. A rebate is exactly what it, or excuse me, a refund is exactly what it sounds like. They do your final audit, they hand you a check, right? Sometimes it can take a number of months, sometimes it can take a while. Generally speaking, it's within 6 months of your wrap, right? You'll get your money. A rebate means that you qualify for a number on paper, right? And that then has to be sold to or brokered to a third party for cash, and they buy that rebate So one of the reasons this works so well in Georgia is because you have customers who buy those rebates left and right, i.e., corporate headquarters like Coca-Cola, Delta, RJR, et cetera. So it's a very symbiotic relationship. Some states will even buy them back from you at that discount. I think that's the way it is in California with their new incentives, that they'll buy it back at 80 or 90 cents on the dollar. Um, so, and again, and really in no case, if you're using the money up front, are you going to get a dollar for dollar value? You're going to have to monetize it at a discount. You'll get it at a discount and you'll monetize it at a discount, which is already discounted from the top amount, right? So let's say your $5 million film qualifies to the nth degree. Um, my general rule of thumb is about 18% is what I would calculate in making my final sort of financial plan. If it's more than that, great. I'd rather underestimate than over. I'd
Yeah.
rather have it and not need it. In other words,
Yep.
line producer friend of mine used to say when I do a budget, and he's done hundreds of millions of dollars in budgets, he would say, "I want enough money left over to buy a sub sandwich at the end of the day,
I
because then
like,
I've not overspent or underspent. You know,
yeah.
keeps me employed. In other words,
Yeah.
so I think they're an incredible tool. Georgia's now is a multi-billion-dollar industry. California just, massively increased
Yeah.
theirs to keep business
Absolutely.
home. I'll say this, and this is sort of a hot take. If the federal government offered even a 10% federal
Be awesome.
incentive, probably 90% of projects that go overseas would come back home.
1,000% agree.
That's how you fix it. That's how you
That's
fix
how you
it,
fix
is
it. Yeah,
you do
putting the
that.
tariff on, not to get political, that's punishing. You should incentivize. And John Voight is
Yeah.
trying to put that forward. A federal, I think it's 20% is what he's trying to push. A 20% federal incentive. I mean,
Well,
that
yeah.
would
I
be
mean,
amazing.
if you look at the Canadian system, their incentives are a combination of provincial incentives and federal incentives, and they're pretty damn generous. That's why people are going there. And the
Exactly.
UK right now, I think right now, still has basically the best in the world. They'll qualify pretty much anybody, British or not, right?
Yeah.
And that's how you get it. That's how you get it going. I mean, Georgia, one of the reasons for Georgia's success is they have no cap, right? They have no finite amount of
Yeah.
money.
Right.
So it's come one, come all. Serve, first come, first serve. When you have a cap, that's fine. I get it. Some of the smaller states need it.
Yep.
Um, but you also have states that overspend, meaning that somebody asked me the other day, well, what's the first question I should ask the film office when I talk to them? I'd say, how many years in advance are you oversold?
Great
Right?
question. Great question.
Know that going into it,
Great question.
right?
Because of Virginia, I can tell you it's a couple years at
Yeah.
best.
My
At
own
best.
state of South Carolina at one point was about 3 years ahead,
Right.
right?
Right.
Or oversold. New York, I heard at one point was 5. I think that's since been abated. And
Yeah.
look, I'm not saying that's the way it is now. I'm saying the
Yeah.
last time I had
That's right.
serious
Yeah.
conversations,
Right.
it was oversold. I'd love to shoot in my own state. I'd love to roll out of my own bed and go to work, you
Yeah.
know.
Exactly.
Um, ours get eaten up a lot by some of the series that are shot here, and I'm not complaining. I'm glad they are. I'm glad people are
Yeah.
working,
Absolutely. Yeah.
but it's
Rather
limiting.
than
It's
working.
limiting. Yeah,
So,
it's limiting.
I just for, again, real world application, I shot in New York. And so you get New York State incentives. And a lot of times
Mm-hmm.
these things will stack where then the
Mm-hmm.
local municipality, because we shot in upstate New York in a distressed area, added in more money,
Yeah,
more
you get a little
incentive.
sweetener. Yeah,
You get a
yeah,
little nice addition. So make
yeah,
sure when you're looking at tax incentives, find out if it's a rebate, refund. There's very few grants out there. Virginia actually does have a small grant. And then
yeah,
find out the timeline. And that's a great question about how forward are you sold in this? Because Virginia invariably does have a cap. It's not big. So a couple features, studio level, like when Lincoln came through and they shot here, it wiped out our
yeah.
incentives, you know,
Well, Oklahoma
year
got
and a
really
half.
aggressive with theirs too, and then Pillars of the Flower Moon came in, and
Yeah.
that was it, right?
Yeah, that was it. Right.
Um, you know, I'm working in a couple. I mean, North Carolina has a grant too. 'Cause we've got something set up there to shoot this fall. And those guys have been great to work with. Shout out to them um, at the North Carolina Film Office. And we're setting one up in New Mexico. New Mexico has those sort of
Yes,
different sweeteners in terms of
absolutely.
labor,
They do. Yep.
rural areas. You can max out at 40% if
That's
you really
crazy.
wring it all out, you know. And
Crazy.
again, I can't say this enough. That's not 40% of your budget. It's
That's
not
right.
40 cents on the dollar. That's the starting point, and you're deducting from there. So you're really going to wind up in that particular case probably with about 25-30% at maximum. But that's a pretty big chunk of
Still
money, man,
crazy.
when you're
Crazy.
talking about independent film.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
And
it's
also,
going. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, I just say also bear in mind some states have minimum spends too. So I
Yes, they
mean,
do.
Georgia's like a 500,000, I think.
They
Mississippi's
are.
50,000. Some of them don't, some of them do. Just check that out,
That's right.
before
Yeah,
you
Virginia, I think it's
dig
250.
in.
It might be 500. Yeah, they do have a minimum
Hmm.
spend you need. Again, it behooves you to understand that, and the a seasoned line producer will also kind of help bake that in. And when we're talking about de-risking, that's part of the other de-risking element is having these tax incentives clear in your plan. If we're going after that $5 million, and you're trying to seek investors, what's the minimum amount you would take? And then are you putting that in escrow? How long are you keeping it there for? And then at what point can you kind of greenlight the project or actually start spending capital? And I'd love to know even like what's your first spend? Is it getting that casting director also? So
Yeah.
what's the minimum you're going to take in for investment? Are you putting it in escrow? And then what are you doing? At what point does it trigger you to be able to spend something? And then what's your first spend?
Yeah. Well, first spend is going to be development if you can raise that money, and that's the hardest money to raise. And there's some ways to kind of do that make it seem a little less daunting, especially to an investor. Um, but you have to. I've said this since day one. You have to raise a little bit of money so you can raise a lot of money,
Yeah.
and you have to get a decent. It's not just whoever will volunteer to do your budget. You need your budget done by a qualified, bondable line producer if you're going into any kind of sizable raise, right? If you're under a million, you're probably not going to need a bond. You probably can't get a bond. So those are sort of extenuating circumstances, but you still want somebody who knows what they're doing,
Yeah.
right? Um, if you're in the million range, multi-million dollar range, you need a qualified line producer who is bondable. And but what I mean by that is they can get a completion bond with little to no issue, right? And we can get into what that means if you want. But to get a good budget done will cost you a couple grand. You need some artwork. I recommend analytics to a degree. I recommend knowing your audience. I recommend a social media plan. I work with clients too in terms of creating a whole development strategy and sort of what that costs a la carte or in en masse, because you need all of this stuff to sit in front of an investor and have them take you seriously, that you look
Yes.
at it and treat it as a business, right? They might love you and love your script, but that doesn't mean that it's economically viable until you prove it.
Yep.
And these things help. So when you're sitting down to say, well, how do I get the first money in and what do I ask for and what do I get into escrow? That starts with knowing what you're asking for, right? To the dollar. Here's my budget. It's $5,281,321.81.
Yeah.
That's my budget. Here's how I'm going to get there. I'm looking at these tax incentives. I'm looking at this, like I said a few minutes ago. So my ask is probably a minimum of 50% of the budget if I'm just starting out and looking at sort of, hey, what's our opening conversation, right? What I really need from you is just backing. I'll back you. I really rarely ever ask anybody to move money, production money, until the deal is set and everyone can close. Again, I need your commitment on paper that's bulletproof, right? That if I go and do all these things, you are committed, right? There's no wiggle room. So I get
Yep.
left, you know, at the altar looking like a moron, you know.
Right.
Um, Nothing damages a producer's credibility more than having money not show up when it's supposed to,
Absolutely.
you
That-
know?
Yep.
So it's not a, it's not necessarily a black and white question to answer. I would say in a perfect world, I have a backer who is willing to uh, commit to me and my project, give me that sort of hunting license that I mentioned before, allow me to craft the deal. And then when I do, they start moving money in place at a certain day and time, depending on how they're backing it. Now they can also back it with, standby letters of credit or collateral of some sort, which is a different sort of transaction, which we can get into if you want. We can get into the weeds on that. In that case, I'm not asking him to ever move any money, ever. Um, but in most cases, you need money to operate. You know, I had a my mentor one time. I'll tell this sort of little anecdotal story. Had an A-list actor he was going after, and he knew going into the conversation what the sales were going to be and the contracts were going to be if he got that particular actor. That particular actor would not even read the script without having his full fee in escrow and visible. Not that he would take the money, but the money was there if he said yes, right? So what happened? My guy went out, raised the money, had somebody commit those dollars, put that as I think it's about $1.5 million, put it into an account, read the script, committed to the film, right? Then he arranged the financing overall based on that commitment of one actor that moved the needle, significant enough to move the needle. And then $1.5 million got released, right? Went back to the investor. He never spent that money,
It's crazy. It's awesome.
but he gave him, built into the ROI. He got a vig on the money, right? A premium on the money, and he got a little bit of the back end of it for the inconvenience of stashing his money in escrow for 90 days. And that was the parameters that he put on the agency and the actor to say, you got 90 days to give me an answer. Otherwise, we're pulling the money, right? Or we'll have to pull the money. It wasn't a threat. It was just like, this is what we
Yeah. Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
This is the window for you to say yes.
Yeah.
And it worked. And he did it a dozen times, that way. So what didn't happen in that? He didn't spend any money, never spent a dime of it. But he
Crazy.
had the credibility and the relationships enough to put the deal together. And those around him had the confidence knowing he could do it because he had done it. Right. Um, so in that particular case, no money was moved until everything was in place. If we're looking sort of, in a perfect world, sort of fantasy land, I come to you and say I need 5 million, we work everything out. And I say, look, at minimum, I need 2.5 from you to guarantee 2.5 or collateralize 2.5 or put 2.5 in a bank. Um, and I build everything off of that. It used to be you could get away with about 20% equity and you could build about a $5 million film out of 20%. So $1 million in cash, you could build about a $5 million film. Now it's not the case. You need more. You need if you're doing straight up, just no frills, high risk type things, it's probably 50%, I'd say,
Yeah.
of the budget. And that needs to be there and visible and committed. And I've run into a few matching fund scenarios, where they say, well, if you go, I'll give 2.5. If you go find somebody else who will give 2.5 and we'll go. Um, that can work if everybody's willing to show the goods at the same time or some sort of procedure of how that goes. I've run into that landmine before where I'm like, hey, great. Then you go out and you find the other person. And then party A is like, well, I need to see their POF. And then party B is like, well, you
Oh,
already
I need
told me he
to.
was
Yeah.
committed. Now, and it becomes a
Yeah.
standoff,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
everybody just walks away pissed off,
Yeah. No,
basically.
that's never ideal.
Yeah.
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 It can be
Yeah.
nuanced out. So what when you get the money in, let's say you get 2.5 million in, what is your first play? Where do you take the money out to? Do you get a casting agent and have capital?
Yeah, I'm casting my film. I'm working a lot of sort of things at the same time. I'm working with a either producer's rep or sales rep. I'm working with a casting director and a lawyer making offers and sort of getting that done. I can't stress enough how difficult and time consuming casting is. As difficult as it is to raise the money, it's probably equally as challenging to get a cast in place. A lot of times that depends on availability. The
Yeah.
quicker you're mounting your film, the less choice you're going to have, obviously.
Right.
Um, so if you can give yourself some runway, that can ease a little bit. But um, the last film my Doug, my mentor, did took him over a year to get it fully cast.
Oh,
You know,
wow. Wow.
he had made 30 movies by that time,
Oh my
so he
gosh.
wasn't
Yeah.
a
I know.
novice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Unproven producer. Yeah.
I'm I'm in a film now where we've been financed since March, and we're still making offers on our female lead.
Wow. Good grief.
So, and now it's August, right?
Grief.
So it just, it's viable because we have some of the film cast. We have our male lead, but um, it just, you heard the story earlier where we kept offering more and more money. We're bidding against
Yeah.
ourselves and got a no
Yeah.
thank you months later. But that's a difficult thing. So allow that kind of time. Your excitement and zeal um, does not matter to them.
Yeah.
It's schedule, price. Do I like the director? Do I like the team? I can't tell you how many times I've seen deals go away because it was just I just don't like that guy,
Yeah.
or how fast they come together because they're like, oh, I just love working with them. They got great energy and just love them, love what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
Um, it could come together fast, but casting is a real X factor, and
Yeah.
any casting director will tell you that. Any one of them will. So
Yeah.
I'd like to start that process as early as possible. This is why I'm talking about having that development money so I can pay my casting director at least a couple of bucks
Hmm.
to read my script, give me an assessment, give me interest and avails. I'll give you another example. I'm producing a biopic, and we had an actor specifically in mind for this. The minute we brought in a casting director and we had one conversation, he said, "I can tell you that person doesn't play real people. They won't do it. They won't play biopics."
Hmm.
So rather than mess around for the next 6 months chasing this guy, I found that out
Yeah.
on day one. So they're like, you can make an offer, but it's not going to go anywhere. He will not do biopics.
Wow. No,
Will
that's
not
some
do it.
good inside baseball info right there.
Yeah, absolutely. But you also find out who's looking for something,
Yeah.
like so
Sure.
and so needs a project. They really want to do a horror movie, or they really want to do a comedy, or they really want to do something to expand their repertoire. They're looking for award bait, a casting director is going to have that intel. I mean, casting, I love all of the ones I work with, but and don't get me wrong, they work for you, but also their clients are the agencies, not
Yes.
you really. That's their clients,
100%.
and that's who they kind of have to take their
Definitely.
lead
That is.
from
Yeah.
in terms of how they operate. And I want to make sure that I can not embarrass them too, because that's their currency,
Absolutely. Yeah,
right?
exactly. Because that is with them making offers, legitimate, viable offers. A lot of times, independents, the reason casting directors are so kind of, hands out a lot of times is because you're not funded and you want them to go out and make a deal and offer on your behalf. It's their reputation on the line.
100%.
And if it
Yeah,
falls apart, and look, we all recognize the chicken and the egg. Everyone understands the problem. Well, I need the cast to get the money. You got to be able to do all the things Matt had talked about putting the package together to be able to
mhm,
get some of that money in to make it real. And that's kind of a loose term I've heard also is the project real? And what they're meaning is, does it have funding? It doesn't need to be 100% funded, but a significant portion of funding that someone
yeah,
can go out and make offers
right,
that makes it real. And most
yeah.
times, unfortunately, it's not real because you get some indie filmmaker that thinks they're going to be different and the casting director is going to take on their project. They're going to be able to cast Tom Cruise and then they'll raise the money. Well, that's just not the way the industry
Doesn't happen that way.
does
Doesn't
not work.
they do not want you raising money off their client's name.
100%.
Do
Yeah.
not want that. You will not get that. Maybe you are, you're Tom Hanks's brother or cousin, or you're married to somebody. You might get some sort of leeway
Might.
there to where they come
Yeah.
on as a producer, or they give you some advice, or open a door, set a meeting. That's happened
Absolutely.
before. That's valuable too. But to your point, you can. This is why relationships in this business matter because an agency whose talent you want might look at the casting agent and go, oh, well, they're working with you, Mr. or Ms. Casting person. Therefore, there's some legitimacy there. Okay, cool. If you're on board, that tells me something. Same true with a production company, same true with a lawyer, particular
Yeah.
lawyer that might be repping you, or a producer's rep, or your rep at an agency or whatnot. That does give you some legitimacy. And I can hear the groans in the world of independent
Oh,
filmmaking now. Well, how do I get there? How do I
I know.
do that?
Right.
And, I had those same groans early on. I didn't know what I didn't know. You just have to get out there and start making relationships and making moves, meeting people, finding the right projects, having the right conversations, and understanding that it takes a long time to bake this cake, a
Yeah.
long time.
Yeah.
My dad used to say, and then Doug would say too, that an emergency on your part doesn't constitute an emergency on mine.
Absolutely. No, it's
And
it's so true. And you're not talking a little bit of money here. We're talking a lot of money. Investors, a lot of times I hear independent filmmakers talking as though the investor is not smart, wise. I mean, there's a reason most times why they are, an investor and have the capital
right,
to do so. Think about this. A lot of investors didn't grow up with money. They made their money their whole life. Now they're spending the rest of their life trying to defend their money because everybody's asking them for it. Filmmaking
hmm,
isn't the only entrepreneurial endeavor.
yeah,
Everybody's asking for them for an investment. They want their cash. And so they're, having to defend it. And then here you come along thinking they're just going to fund you 100% and you'll get, then you'll be able to get the actor.
yeah,
It's not the way it's going to happen. And, at the end of the day, you have to find a way. I mean, I wish there was a
yeah,
better answer. There's a reason why certain quarterbacks, depending upon what year of, that they're in, they find ways to make touchdowns, period. And some might feel like
yeah,
luck, but all of a sudden they've won 7 games in a row. Well, that's not really luck after that. That's a
no,
measure of skill. Maybe there's certainly an element of luck, just like in filmmaking, but you have to be able to score touchdowns. And if you can't do that, then you're hoping on a
hmm,
wing and a prayer. And like Matt said early on, you might as well go to 7-Eleven and get some lottery tickets because that's pretty
yeah,
much what you're doing. You're
yeah,
not putting together a
100%.
true business.
Yeah, totally. And it's funny, I've used that football analogy too, and I've used it in some of the classes I've taught, is that for the great ones, the game slows down. And the reason the game slows down is because they have a fundamental understanding of how people act and react, generally speaking, in certain circumstances. That's why they watch film, that's why they study
Yes.
film, that's
Yes.
why they study playbooks. That's why you have someone in the NFL or in college who has a football, they call it a football IQ. And that's
Yes.
sort of what that means, is that
That's
they
great.
understand the fundamentals of the game. And that is no different than if you're making movies or stitching together soccer balls or making cheeseburgers. You need to have a fundamental understanding of the business you are in. And I say this every class: know the business you're in. Read the
Yes.
trades, listen to podcasts, talk to friends and experts, understand that.
Absolutely.
That's why I did 15 years worth of production. I'm like, I want to know the business that I want to be in,
Yes.
right? Do I
Yep.
want to stay in production and learn a specific skill? Do I want to become an editor? Do I want to become try to become a writer? There's sort of different mindsets and fundamentals about each one of those sections within the same industry, right? We
Yep.
are both me and a writer are both in the industry. We're not in the same profession, right? So it's understanding too where producers can be effective and understanding. The hardest question I get asked: what do producers do? What does a producer do? I get that asked all the time, especially
Yeah.
from some family and friends.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, it depends on what kind of producer you are,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, I don't think you can be an effective producer at all unless you understand how all of this works.
Yep.
I'm shocked at some of the studio folk that I know who are great people
Yeah.
who have no idea how money comes around.
None.
None,
No, it's
none,
yep.
right? And
Yep.
I'm like,
Completely
part
agree.
of me is like, well, how do you not know that? But then it's like, well, of course, if you're show up every day and food's on the table, you never really understand how it got there,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Someone,
all of it.
yeah, someone in your grouping has put the work in to
Yeah,
make
they
it
figured out how
happen.
to go to the store
Yeah.
and I made the analogy the other day. They were like, well, it's just like baking a cake. I was like, no, it's like knowing how to buy the house where the oven is that bakes the cake first,
Right.
and it's
Right.
really kind of, and I don't say that with arrogance or any kind of, misguided confidence. It's just years of learning from my own mistakes
Yeah.
and learning from people who are smarter than me.
Yeah.
Same guy told me, he said, look, producing, he said, here's how you answer that question. I said, okay. And he goes, it's hiring people who are better at what they do than you and getting out of their way.
That's
That's
it.
what producing is,
Yep.
right? And creating the runway for the director to direct, the writer to write, the actors to act, and so forth and so on. Your job is to figure out how to pay for the party and keep
Yep.
everybody, keep the dance, keep the music going, keep the food bowls full, keep people safe from doing something stupid.
Amen to
That's
that.
your
Yep.
job. You're hosting the party. And,
Yep.
hopefully we get to make something and put something into the world and have that little bit of immortality at the same time.
Absolutely. And the cool thing is a lot of people, thinking about producing, I think every independent filmmaker, regardless of what you do in the industry, should produce something at least at one point. And
Yeah.
if you're an actor out there and listening, know better than to become a producer. You shouldn't be waiting. You should be producing. Um,
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. I
yeah.
couldn't agree more. I mean, it's the old adage of it's better to, create your own job than ask for a job, right? And, you know, you have to think like an entrepreneur. You have to.
Yep.
Um, and I was in talking with Mara, in the many classes I've done with her. Um, it is, I would say, probably, despite backgrounds, the vast majority of those populating those classes are, actors, directors, producers who are trying to sort of figure out how to be a multi hyphenate, right? Because
Yep.
the actors are not getting the roles they want, or the
That's right.
producers are not getting the jobs they want. So
Yep.
they're like, screw it, I'm just going to go do it myself,
Absolutely. And
and
if you look at Hollywood and we claim a lot like they don't do a lot of things well, like we know better than they do. They do a lot of things great. And one of the things that they do, people that have longevity in the business, look them up. Almost every one of them invariably has a production company, including
yep,
Brad Pitt, Tom Cruise, Reese
yep,
Witherspoon. I mean, all of them that have a longevity own a production
yep,
company. Why? Because they know that at some point they're going to quote unquote age out and they're going to need to have that production that they can roll. And also, why not be
yep.
able to take a little bit more of a bigger bite of the apple when they also can potentially become the financiers as well? So,
Yeah, 100%. Well, they recognize pretty early on, especially actors and A-list actors and whatnot, the marquee names that they are the brand.
they are
So
the
at the end
brand.
of the day, that's a kind of a natural thing. And a lot of them will bring in a producer who knows how to sort of make the sausage, make the donuts, as one of my friends used to say.
Yep.
Um, and they are sort of the face of it. And there are many. This is the thing that a lot of folks don't understand. There are many actors, male, female, old, young, who are very savvy people
Yes.
and know how this works. They know their worth. They
Yep.
know what they bring to the table, and they're saying, "Well, I don't want to just get my fee and a couple of points. I'm the reason why all this thing came together. So I'm going to take a bigger bite of the apple, and more power to them." This goes back to like Lucille Ball, who should be studied as to how she did business,
Super smart. Like her
right?
entrepreneurial is crazy smart. Another one that I find extremely fascinating. We were talking about, trying to go out and find actors and stuff. The movie Twins.
Mm-hmm.
Schwarzenegger wanted to do a comedy. Nobody would hire him to do a comedy. He's like, fine, I'll take my entire salary. I think him and DeVito did this.
Mm-hmm.
I'll take my entire salary on the back end. And of course, they made
Yep.
way more money,
Yep.
because the movie
Yep.
did so well than they would
Yep.
have with that because Schwarzenegger didn't want to get typecast that he thought he could do comedy and he went out and proved it with the mighty dollar. That's another
Yeah.
thing, a way that you can find potentially somebody as casting directors know that inside baseball. Imagine if you're the casting director and you
Right.
knew Schwarzenegger wanted to come over to do a comedy. Well, there
Yep.
are the same scenarios even now, and they know that inside track, and you're leveraging the casting director and their relationships to do so. So you want to
Yep.
make sure that you're, of course, paying for that service. Where can people find you, follow you work? connect to collaborate? You had talked about
Sure.
being able to, even set up some development stuff for people. Where can people find you? What's the best way?
Best way is you can contact me through my website at pinionpictures.com. There's a email address there. That's probably the best way to contact me. I've just recently added a woman named Christina Colucci, who I sort of swiped from the studio world, who's now doing
Oh,
my
awesome.
development, and she's been such a great add to the company in terms of her creative mind is unmatched, and it has really sort of helped me uh, begin to sort of level up in a sense of having more time to concentrate on business development and having her kind of spearhead a lot of the creative stuff. And so she's, of course, she's into the business stuff too and does that very well. But
Yeah,
um, we now have, now there are a couple of us, which is,
that's
it
awesome.
was just new for me because I've always been the guy on the street corner with the drums and the harmonica and the guitar and the cymbals and playing all the instruments at
I like
once.
that.
And
Yeah.
so it's nice to have a colleague and a confidant in that. But yeah, I mean, pinionpictures.com is probably the easiest way to
Yeah.
contact me. I'm
Perfect.
on social. Instagram is all across the board is at Pinion Pictures. LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, uh, and so forth. Blue Sky, all of them are at Pinion Pictures of some sort. Yeah,
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, I
absolutely.
know we talked about being a producer and you're doing the party for everyone else, but the cool thing is like why then do it? It's because you're at the party too. When you host a party,
100%.
you get
Yeah,
you get to party. And that
right.
is the payoff is you're a
Yeah,
part of the thing. And in fact, most people they recognize the director, certainly they recognize the A-list talent. They don't realize that without the producer, there would be no story, period. It
yeah.
is on the backs and shoulders of producers that these things are built. So you better know your business. Any final thoughts, Matthew, for our
100%. Well, I would just say that, you're absolutely right. You get to go to the party too. I, for better for worse, I think it's for better. I pick people first before I pick the project. Scripts can be rewritten,
Mhm.
re-engineered. Creative stuff can be collaborative. Um, I pick people. It's a marriage, and when you set out on a project with somebody, you're hoping it becomes a successful thing. Even in the best case scenario, you're working with those people for years, right?
Yeah.
Even if you were trying to develop something, and I think the oldest project I have on my docket is about 11 years old that I've been trying to sort of get done for a long time. I don't think that would have lasted if I wasn't, close friends with the filmmakers and have gotten to know them as human beings. We've become friends,
Yeah.
outside of business. And
Right.
I know people say, well, don't do business with your friends. I get that. Sometimes you got to have hard conversations. Sometimes you speak as family do. There's always love, but some days I don't like you. You know,
Yeah.
I love you always, but today, we're
Yeah.
challenging that.
Sorry. Yeah.
But but I really am lucky in the folks that I get to work with every day on the projects we're developing, and the hopes that we have. We're all rowing in the same direction. We're all on the same team. I want people to win. I want them to win. If they win,
Like
I'm
it.
probably winning too, and vice
Absolutely.
versa. And
Yep.
I want to elevate voices. There are far too many talented people in the world that need a break. They need a way in. They need something said, something seen, something done. And I'm honored to be a part of that process for sure. I love story. I love music. I love movies. I love when they all come together in
Yeah.
that sort of visual and auditory package. There's just nothing more special than a great
Absolutely. Yeah.
shot or a great soundtrack and how that makes us all feel at the end of the day.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. At the end of the
Just,
day, too, I'm addicted to stories. I still, that's one
yeah.
thing appreciate so much about Tom Cruise is the dude still loves the theater experience and talks about getting a thing of popcorn and
He's a fan.
you
He
could tell he
he's a
is a fan.
fan.
He's
I mean,
legitimately
that's
a fan.
yeah, and that's so important is that, and Christina, who I just mentioned, we're talking about this just the other day. I was like, one of the things I really love about her is she's a fan,
Yeah.
right? she's probably seen 10,000 movies in her day and knows, knows the Kurosawas, knows the Scorseses, knows the, you don't have to be that kind of a Tarantino-esque mind
Yeah.
for cinema. You don't have to be a cinemaphile to enjoy movies and wanting to make
Yeah.
movies or television, but there is a passion to it. There is an art to it. There is a poetry to it, I think, at the end of the day, and something incredibly rewarding about putting something into the world, you
Yeah.
know. Um,
Absolutely.
it's just nothing like it. I'm pretty sure I'm uniquely unqualified for pretty much everything but this, and I'm grateful that it is this every day.
Yeah, no, me too. I can't remember the exact quote from C.S. Lewis, but he talked about tell them that there are dragons through story, but also tell them how they can be defeated. It is kind of that stories have power. We know that
Yeah,
they do. We wouldn't be drawn to them, and the right story can change the world. We know that too.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
well, I
yeah. That's
appreciate. Yeah, go ahead, brother.
no, no. It reminded me of I'm going to butcher the phrase, from Margaret, um, something to the effect of, "In the end, we all become someone's story."
Yeah,
And I've always been touched by that, been moved by that how we
yeah,
affect
yeah.
uh, others in our sort of mutual quests. It matters
It
at the
does
end of the
matter.
day.
It does matter
These are the things. These are the
significantly.
things we read and write about. These are the things we talk about and share. It's common ground. When my father and I weren't getting along for whatever reason, we could talk about a movie. We could talk about Georgia
Yep.
football. You know,
Yep.
Politics, gender, age, race, whatever. We could all talk about The Godfather. We could all quote,
Yeah.
Seinfeld or
Yeah.
or Friends or something like that. There's a shared experience there that
Yeah.
is is really the poetry of what we do. I think.
Yeah. No, it's powerful and why we're doing what we're doing. Well, I
Indeed.
appreciate you all watching and listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment so that Matthew and I can know that you all are out there and we're hopefully making a difference. It does help the channel also. But I believe we are good to go to conclude our conversation with Matthew Morris. I appreciate his time. And remember, nothing is wasted.